My father was an instrument maker. He used to make cuatros. And my uncle on my mother's side, who raised me, he was the first male singer with Javier Cugat in 1938. And he is the first maraca player, because he was the maraca player and singer, that recorded with Javier Cugat, because his wife used to do his recordings at the time, Carmen Castillo. And then later on, the first recording she made when she also joined the band was Dinah Shore. So my uncle was involved in music from the mid-30s on. He used to play as a musician on cruise ships, and that's how he used to go to the Caribbean, and that's how he met Miguelito Valdez and the Orquesta Casino de la Playa. So my uncle was involved, and I was born in '39. So before I was born, he was already involved in music, and created quite a name for himself. He, I think he probably wound up doing about 3 or 4 of the Cugat movies, for MGM. He's in a Red Skelton movie and all that. And then he was replaced by Miguelito Valdez in 1940, and then went back with the band again, like in 1945. So I've known the feeling of being in the music since I can remember. And by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I was living with my uncle, and we used to live in the Bronx. And musicians, Machito, Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, Jose Curbelo, they were all friends of my uncle. And eventually, he had his own band. He used to bill himself as the king of the rumba. And he used to play, it was more like a cabaret band. And finally, in the late 40s and early 50s, he decided, and he was a vocalist, by the way, and a maraca player. And in the late 40s and early 50s, he decided that he was going to try his hand at promoting. So by that time, I'm 10 or 11 years old, and as he's doing promoting, dances and activities, why then it's even a closer relationship with those musicians, because now he's become a source of work for them, besides a friend. So with me, I was raised with them, listening to their music and actually meeting them. They used to come up my house. Tito Puente used to come up my house when I was 10 years old, 11 years old. And I'm 67 now, I'm gonna be 68. So I've known this since I was a child. And my uncle had a great interest in the music, but I have an older sister, Margarita, who's a really good dancer, and a first cousin older also, who was a very good percussionist and played with my uncle's band. His name was Ferdinand Lopez. And so with their involvement as actual musicians, there was a continuity in terms of that first generation here already. And my sister danced in a lot of the theaters and a lot of the clubs early on. She loved to dance. And sometimes, especially when she was going to this club called La Tropicana in the Bronx, which is located on Intervale Avenue and Westchester, at the junction of Intervale and Westchester, named after the Tropicana in Cuba. They had matinee shows on Saturdays, and my sister would use me as an excuse to get to the show, so she would take me to the show. And that was the first time I saw Machito, and I saw Marcelino Guerra's big band, and I was about 12 years old. And Cesar Concepcion, which was the first time I saw Mongo Santa Maria. The first gigs he did was with Cesar Concepcion's band. Then later I saw him with Tito Puente. So I was also exposed to the music live, and until I was 14 and a half, which I lived in New York, and I eventually moved to Puerto Rico with my natural father. Catalino would also sometimes he'd go to see musicians rehearse and all that, and he and I had a good bond, and he'd take me with him. So I was involved just by being with my uncle, and in lieu of my brothers and the love that they had for music, my brother, my whole family. So when I joined the service, I started collecting Latin music. I started getting interested in playing the conga drum, because my cousin Freddie had taught me, the basic beats. And I was in the Navy 6 years, and during the time I was in the Navy, I developed a pretty good connection of records. And my only the only thing I used to look forward to in terms of from home, because my wife was with me, especially when I lived in the Philippines, was the catalog records that I would buy, the records off to the catalog, the RCA, and then eventually Allegra Records. So I would always wait, you know, for these records to come, and that was the new thing that was starting to happen in Latin music. And that's really how I just started, just as a collector and with my uncle's involvement. My uncle used to book the Palladium. He used to do all of the theaters in New York, and he would bring acts from all over the Spanish-speaking world. And if they fit the Palladium, then after they did the theater, he'd take them to the Palladium for the second and third set. And so we were very involved. And eventually, he was the one that booked the Palladium until it closed, actually. And Catarino, through him and through knowing all of the musicians, eventually I developed friendships with a lot of them. And my interest became keener and keener, but always as a collector and as a consumer. You know, I love to go and see the bands play. By that time, Eddie Palmieri and Pacheco and Ray Barretto. Then I like the newer wave more because I like the rhythm aspect of it. They were, you know, to my liking more. So I've been seeing these bands and being with them all my life. That's the connection.
Wow. I read that actually Tito Puente used to send his guys over to your place so that they would listen either to music that you had or get educated in something or other.
Yeah, no, that wasn't Tito Puente. That was Eddie Palmieri.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
yeah,
I thought it was
Eddie.
Tito Puente. Okay.
Eddie, when Nicky Marrero and Andy Gonzalez and all these guys, when they joined his band, he would tell them, "You got to spend some time with Rene," because by that time I had acquired a pretty large collection of records. And live tapes and all that, and we'd spend time. So we like co-educated each other. I certainly always feel that I learned more from them than they learned from me. It was a shared experience, but they had a new attitude, and they were well versed in jazz, and especially Andy and Jerry, and they had early on worked already with Dizzy Gillespie, and they were the new wave of musician, rejected the uniforms. They used to play with a band called Orquesta Flamboyant, and Flamboyant, Frankie Dante was a singer. And they were the first ones that broke out of that formal, you know, musicians thing, which a lot of musicians still wish today they did, you know, and some bands do it. But they all came dressed any way they wanted to, and they kept saying, you know, we're musicians, not monkeys and stuff like that. But it was just, it's the role of youth, you know, rejecting the old and creating something new. So there was a new attitude that I liked about them a lot, and they were very, very, very interested in learning. But it wasn't only about Cuban music. Most of my music was Cuban, but it was also about Puerto Rican roots and all of the other things that we could share. And so I raised myself in music with them, and yes, they used to come to my house, and eventually that's how we formed this group that we recorded, which is the Grupo Folclórico y Experimental Nueva Yorkino. It came out of that relationship.